So I'm not going to read all of these plagues. You've seen the movie, right? But first plague was in 7. The first encounter with Pharaoh was in 5. And last week in chapter 6, there was this strange interlude that Moses decided to just go and talk about family history. He stopped right in the middle of a story in chapter 6, verse 13. It said, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and gave them a command, to go and talk to the children of Israel. And something for the Pharaoh as well. And then he stopped and he said, these are the families. So, historians have a lot of different takes on that. They say that this is a collection of all sorts of various scrolls written at different times, and they just got patched together this way. But we know, as evangelicals, we don't assume weirdness for the authorship of the Torah. We assume that Moses wrote it just like he said he did. So the Torah, all the way down almost to the very end of the 5th book, is all written by Moses. And that's the way he claims authorship, so we'll assume that is correct. And he didn't necessarily write them all in order like this. He didn't necessarily begin with Genesis 1:1 and go right straight through. But he did write it all, and it was put together in a way that he wanted it to be. That we have a chronological version, beginning with the beginning of creation. Although when he first started writing, it was probably right after crossing the Red Sea. Because it was shortly after that, within the next couple of days, that we get a message from God to Moses saying, now I want you to write down the history of your travels. It's also interesting that particular location, if they had just crossed the western part of the Red Sea, that Gulf of Suez, which heads straight up towards the Mediterranean, if they had crossed that part and were coming down along the west side of Sinai, you looking for a map? Well, we might have one on top of that green thing there. There's a bunch of maps up there. Sinai is like a big triangle, right? Pointing straight down. And the Gulf of Suez is on the left, and the Gulf of Aqaba is on the right. So if they had just crossed the Gulf of Suez, and then were heading down the left side of Sinai, where that would have put them at that time was right near the copper mines of Sinai, which was the Egyptians were running that area, but they were running it with Canaanite slaves. And the Canaanites, they had a new script that had been developed. It was the first of its kind in the world. Yep. So the traditional path has them crossing over the Red Sea up there and heading down that west side. See that red line there?
Yep.
There are mines there. And those mines are still there. Of course, they're not working them. There's no Canaanite slaves there today. But their inscriptions are still there. And the Canaanites and the Phoenicians had been developing a script which was phonetic and not hieroglyphic. So you know the impact of that? A phonetic script?
Easier
for people to learn.
Yeah, a whole lot easier. How many letters do we have in our alphabet today? You got 26 letters, and they all have a sound.
32.
And some of them you put them together like a T and an H, and you can make another sound. But you've got all the sounds you need right there in those 26 letters, right? With a phonetic alphabet, you only have to learn the 26 and know, A makes an A sound like apple. It's very simple. And then you can just patch them together to write any word that you can say and know the meaning of, you can write it down. So you don't ever have to have seen it before. You don't have to have been taught this word. You can make it up. And our granddaughter makes up words all the time with sounds that she knows the alphabet sound for. On the other hand, if you have a hieroglyphic language, a character does not mean a sound. A character has a meaning. A character is a word. So if you were to study Chinese, which is a hieroglyphic language,
Or Japanese.
yeah, Japanese. It has some phonetics to it, but they did borrow a lot of their characters from Chinese.
Especially what they call kanji.
They're a lot simpler than the Chinese too.
If you want to, if you're a 5th grade Chinese person learning to write in school, if you want to get competent enough that you can read most newspapers and get the gist of it, you have to learn 10,000 characters. If you want to know all the characters and be a scholar, you have to learn 40,000. Can you imagine trying to memorize
He has a book
40,000?
like this thick
Uh-huh.
of all these words.
Yeah.
That's
And
not nearly all of them.
One little
That-
line in the wrong spot changes everything.
Right.
Mhm.
He can read a lot of it.
So hieroglyphic language is very complicated. It's not going to be suitable for universal education. I mean, they do it in China somehow, but it's really difficult.
Like the characters for knife and power are very similar. The only difference is that or that. Right?
Yeah.
Tall and deep.
So they're going down through Sinai, and they encounter these mines, and it's just at that time where Genesis tells us that, or not Genesis, Exodus tells us that God said, "I want you to start writing down the stories of your travels."
Would those mines be like at Ayun Musa or Marah or Elim?
Yeah, something like that. I forget.
It's just those are the places that they have marked that I think were maybe colonies or small towns or something.
Mhm.
Stops or something.
Mm-hmm.
But this makes sense because it goes along and then you get down here to 26 and it says, "These are the Aaron and Moses to whom the Lord spoke," said. So it kind of,
Mhm.
it makes sense for that to be there.
Yeah. But anyway, in those copper mines, that you will find some inscriptions still today, and they are phonetic. They are things that the Canaanite slaves were writing. And they had their own little temple to their Canaanite god that they were worshiping there, and so they had inscriptions on it. So we can kind of tell what they were writing. But it's interesting that Moses picked this up, and
I got that map too.
although Moses was raised in an Egyptian court, right?
Did they use hieroglyphics? Or?
Yeah, he would have learned the hieroglyphics. He would have been a well-schooled person. But he did not write the Torah in Egyptian hieroglyphics. It would have been the first thing that he had learned, the thing that he was most familiar with, and he chose not to use it. Instead, he picked up something at these mines, or from the Hebrews. He picked up a phonetic script, and he began writing in what would be the earliest form of Hebrew. And
Oh.
they were letters. Each letter had a sound. So we don't have to puzzle over it like we do with Egyptian hieroglyphics. If you've got the alphabet memorized, you can read whatever he wrote. So what we're reading here in Exodus chapter, the end of 6, and the beginning of 7, this is something that he would have gone back and written later as he filled it in. Do you remember while they were on this journey towards the Holy Land, it says that Moses set up a tabernacle of meeting outside of the camp
Yes.
so that he could sit down and speak with God, like a friend talks to his friend face to face? Well, where else would he have gotten the story of Genesis chapter 1? So you had to get that, directly from the horse's mouth, right? Nobody else was there
Well,
but God.
okay, but I don't like calling God a horse.
Yeah.
It's just the same.
I know, but it doesn't.
So during those meetings with God in the tabernacle of meeting is the most likely time when Moses learned the creation story. And he got it directly from the guy who did it, right? So we don't know if God gave him the words and said, here, write it down the way I'm telling you, or if God gave him a vision of it and then Moses wrote what he saw. We're not told that. Moses just goes into the story in Genesis 1. But he would have gone back and filled that in later because he couldn't have known all of that until after the Exodus.
Yes. Okay.
So obviously the earliest part of what he's writing is the times immediately after the Red Sea crossing. And some biblical scholars like to say that the Song of Miriam is the oldest written part of the Bible, where she, made a song after they crossed the Red Sea. Anyway, back to Exodus chapter 6. What we read last week from verse 16 down to 20. From 16 to 20 is talking about the family of Levi. From that particular section, how many generations were there from the time they entered Egypt until the time they left and were rescued?
16 to what? 20?
Yeah, it's between 16 and 20.
Didn't we say?
Well, there was
We said
137 people
7, didn't we?
in his family.
137 years. Where'd you get the country?
Where?
Levi was one.
That's,
and the years of the life of Levi. Okay.
Amram. You looking in verse 20?
Wait,
No,
it was
I'm
less
looking
than
at
7. It was like 4, wasn't it?
Okay, he lived to be 137, and then down in verse 20, Amram lived to be 137. Amram is who to Moses?
Mine says both of them lived to be 137.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I thought you said 140.
Who is Amram to Moses? Amram and Jochebed. Remember that from the movie?
No.
No. Haven't watched Charlton
Amram
Heston for a while?
Was the son of Kohath.
God.
Yeah,
That was his dad and his mom.
Jochebed and Amram.
He does not describe too many women's names in here, but he put his mother's name in there.
Amram is his mother.
No, that's his father.
Jochebed is his mother.
Yeah. Doesn't sound like a pretty woman's name, does it?
Amram took as his wife Jochebed, his father's sister. He married his aunt?
Yeah. Well, now, when people are living to be 137 years old, their aunt could be considerably younger than they are. Remember, you lived that long and you're having a lot of kids
Those
during
are
all that time.
Moses' parents.
His parents are Amram and Jochebed. So how many generations from Levi entering Egypt?
This is an American school teacher.
Hmm.
Wasn't for me.
Was it 4?
Four generations. You've got Levi, and then let's see, Kohath, and then Amram, and then his son is Moses. So Moses is 4th generation.
So, but Aaron and Moses are both his sons, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
So in one place we are told that they were in captivity in Egypt for 400 years. In this place we're told that they're in captivity for 4 generations. But when people are living well over 100 years and they're having kids, well after they're 100 years old, a generation might be 100 years.
Yeah.
But at the same time, think of the overlap.
I think it was Abraham's case. Yeah, he had Isaac.
Let me see if I can make
Yeah,
it
I think
visual
so.
for you.
Just don't use 32 letters of the alphabet.
Who's got 32?
That's what Jeremy said
Jeremy
earlier.
has 32.
Just pull the number up
But
by
he's probably only got 28 teeth, so.
Well, we'll start Levi up here.
Okay.
And he's one of them that lived to be 137, right?
Right.
He's
Yeah.
tall.
And then
He got no arms though.
This is the entry into Egypt. And this is the Exodus, okay?
okay.
I've gone a little bit too far. 137 years. He dies there.
Right.
But he's got 3 kids, right?
Right.
They could be,
Gershon.
we have no idea how far apart they are in age.
No.
Well, three sons.
Yes.
The
He
daughters
might have
aren't
had
listed.
900 daughters, who knows?
Yes.
Three sons who became head of clans. Those are the important ones that are mentioned.
Yep.
So this one, could have lived that long. The next one, I've lived this long. It's we're not told when they all died, right?
Right.
Well,
So his sons, or even his grandsons, could have been still alive at the Exodus.
Kohath was 133.
Who's
Okay.
Kohath?
That's
But if you look at how these lines are crossing,
the
Here you've
second
got-
son of Levi.
1, 2, 3 generations already here, but he's contemporary with his father and his uncle's generation. So when you live that long, there's a whole lot of overlap, and that's why there could be only 4 generations, but
Okay.
multitudes of people were born, and many of them that are born in the middle of it are still alive. So there's some historians have used this against the Bible and said, well, one place it says 4 generations, one place it says 400 years. They're applying our current situation to those times. We think of a generation as 20 or 30 years, because that's when you're having kids, right?
Right.
But Abraham's having kids up until he's about 175. So generations are extremely long back then. And there's a whole lot of overlap. And you get people marrying their aunts too. But their aunt could be quite a bit younger than them. What?
I would think it would still be
Strange.
family is family. I don't care how old they are. I can't marry my
No, you can't
3-year-old
now.
granddaughter.
No, we have
mean,
the
Not that
law.
I
The
would
laws
do,
of
but-
about incest, and you can't marry somebody that's so closely related to you. That's a relatively recent development, just in the last few hundred years.
Okay.
Back then, they didn't have that. The farther back you go, the more closely people are related, because you get closer to Noah, right? Everybody's descended from Noah. So his kids would have had to marry their sisters and then cousins, and there's no way around it.
Well, it was a good thing.
And if you go back far enough, who did Adam marry?
Himself.
He married himself. He married an exact clone of himself. There was no difference in the DNA between those two people.
But yet when they were kicked out of the garden, who did they marry? Who did their kids marry?
They had to marry sisters.
They went out into the lands of the people, it says, or something like that.
Well, after they left, it says that Adam had other sons and daughters. So we're,
He had Seth.
yeah, more. It said Seth, and then it says many other sons and daughters. So we know that there was a lot of other people that came from Adam and Eve.
Kissing cousins.
Well, definitely.
Okay.
It is not important back then because their DNA was much more pure. It is important not to have incestuous relationships now because our DNA is so messed up. And if people who are the average person today, according to geneticists, has about 4,000 errors in their DNA. And a lot of them you can't tell what they're doing. Some of them you can. I was obviously born half blind, and that's not environmental, that's hereditary. We've got all kinds of physical ailments, but when people who are very closely related and they have similar physical ailments, if they marry each other, they you're locking in those problems and making them
It's just like
worse.
if you're breeding dogs or horses or rabbits or cows.
Yeah, we didn't really know this. Back in Bible times, it just wasn't an issue. But, you know, the first genetic errors that we notice are with Rachel and Leah. Remember that Jacob didn't like Leah too much because she had an eye problem?
Yeah.
So she had a genetic problem that was beginning to show there. You're getting some errors build up within the families. But we really took note of it with the families of Europe, the royal families, you know, the Habsburgs. These people, they were always marrying relatives because we want to keep that nice royal blood pure.
Yeah.
So World War I, do you know that was a war of cousins?
Really?
Yeah, the King of England, the Kaiser Wilhelm, all of those kings that were involved in World War I, they were cousins. So when they get old enough and want to go out and find somebody to marry, they send them off to go over to this other country and go find one of your relatives. But the Habsburg family that ruled much of Western Europe for hundreds of years, they got progressively stranger. Yeah, by the end of the Habsburg dynasty, they had this famous great big Habsburg nose. They also had a whole lot of hemophiliacs in their family. A lot of them were bleeders. And some of them towards the end were just utterly insane. There was some king of Spain, Charles or something like that. He was nuttier than a fruitcake. But that compounded in the families because they kept marrying close relatives.
I still see that name. That here in the United States, it's a name that last name that some people have.
Mm-hmm.
I saw it on a tombstone the other day, and I also saw it on a name tag of someone in the army. So
Yeah.
they have descendants here, but
Mm-hmm. Well, they're not allowed to interbreed like that anymore.
yeah.
Because we did come up with laws against incest a couple hundred years ago. I don't know when the first laws began, but it was definitely looking back at the crazy things that happened with these pharaohs always marrying their sisters and the Habsburgs. So we decided to put a stop to that. Nobody closer than a second cousin. So. I remember when one of my nephews went off to college over at Western, his parents told him, "Now you watch out with the girls you date, because there's one or two blonde girls over there that are your relatives going to that college." So we don't always know our close relatives, Do you know all of your second cousins? I have no clue who all of mine are.
You do.
I think I do.
I know some of mine, not all of them.
I know quite a few. I guarantee not all of them.
All right, so let's read the last part of chapter 6, verse 26. 28. It's just going to repeat where we stopped off in verse 13. It's going to repeat that. So read verse 28 down to chapter 7, verse 4.
Okay. Through 4 or to 4?
Through 4.
On the day when the Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, the Lord said to Moses, "I am the Lord. Tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I say to you." But Moses said to the Lord, "Behold, I am of uncircumcised lips. How will Pharaoh listen to me?" And the Lord said to Moses, "See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall tell Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go out of his land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt, Pharaoh will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring my hosts, my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great acts of judgment." What does it mean that he had uncircumcised lips?
That's like another word for sinful, basically. I'm unworthy for this task. It may be that the Israelites looked at him as uncircumcised because he wasn't raised with them. He was raised as an Egyptian.
Well, he probably wasn't circumcised.
Don't
He would have
know.
been circumcised at 12.
His
Mine says unskilled in speech.
mhm.
Instead of
It can be
uncircumcised
taken
lips.
different ways. I don't know the ancient Hebrew, so I can't go into detail on that. But
He might have been circumcised because they get circumcised at 8 days old, right?
No.
But you can get circumcised later.
They get circumcised at 12, Jewish people do.
We know that Moses' son was not circumcised until they were on the journey back to Egypt, right? And that's why God almost killed him, and his wife had to circumcise the son, and then she threw the foreskin at him, and she's
Yeah.
like, "Now you're a husband of blood to me."
I
She
think
didn't
we-
like that very much at all.
We read that last week, didn't we?
It's
Or it
been
might
maybe
have
2
been a
weeks.
couple
Those
weeks.
people were different.
But if God was going to kill him because his son was uncircumcised, and circumcising the son fixed the problem, and then Moses got better, that kind of indicates that Moses himself was circumcised, doesn't it? We're not told that explicitly, but it seems from the story that Moses was circumcised. And you can get circumcised at any age.
Yeah.
Traditionally, they have a certain age when they do it, but you can do it when you're older too. Kind of an awful thought, but
My dad would have attested to that. He was in his 50s before he was circumcised.
Ow!
Yeah.
well,
That's just a
you better just knock me out completely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to be awake,
Doesn't
and
sound good, does it?
No, it can't
you
be
know,
any worse
I know
than
martial arts.
Christianity.
You don't want me awake when that happens.
You're probably right.
Painful.
So, I'm thinking probably Moses was already circumcised.
Okay, so
And yet he
just-
says, "I have uncircumcised lips." I'm thinking that that is just another expression that he's using to say unworthy. My lips are incompetent to make this speech to the Pharaoh. God says, Aaron's going to do it for you. So, who's on their side at this point?
God,
God is, because God, well, he's kind of a severe taskmaster.
yep.
God is sending Moses and Aaron. He's
Yeah.
not taking any back talk from them.
Nope.
But clearly, Pharaoh and the Egyptians are not on their side.
Oh, heck no.
And now the Israelites have turned against them. It's like everybody in the country hates Moses. And God says, you're going to save them anyway, whether they want to be saved or not. God says, they hate me. Or Moses said, they hate me. And God says, you're going anyway. I'm still sending you. Don't want no excuses.
That's how it is when you're in a position of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
It just comes with the job.
Yeah. And you might as well not look at those approval poll numbers, because
Yeah.
they'll just discourage you, won't they?
Yeah.
But in America today, we seem to focus on that a lot. I do want to look at Moses or Aaron's rod. Somebody read 8 through 13.
Chapter 6,
7.
8 through 13. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. Then Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned the wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and it would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said.
Okay. This rod is now described as Aaron's rod. But remember, back before Moses came to Egypt, it was Moses' rod.
Yeah.
So Aaron is not only speaking for him, he's carrying his stick. And he's the one that gets up there in front of Pharaoh and does the sign which God told Moses to do. So because Moses said, I'm not a good speaker, he lost the speaking part. That was handed over to Aaron. And also the miraculous part was handed over to Aaron. So Aaron is doing that. And in verse 12 it says, whose rod is it?
Aaron's rod.
That's Aaron's rod now. Interesting. I think that's the same rod that Moses picked up on the way to Egypt. I think that what was Moses's became Aaron's. I don't think it's a different rod. Do you?
I don't know, they could both have a rod.
Well, prove yourself, with the mirror, then you shall say to Aaron.
Does
So
it say
Moses
any-
was supposed to say to Aaron, take your staff and cast it down.
Mhm.
Maybe they both had one.
Does it say anywhere prior to all this that Moses turned over his rod to Aaron?
No, but he's turned over the speaking part to him.
Yeah, I
So-
guess it could be.
It's kind of a 50-50. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
Yeah.
Remember Moses was 80 and Aaron was 83 when they did this?
Well, that's barely middle age for these
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. They didn't have 4,000 bad DNAs running loose in their body.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing. We
Sure that-
also see Aaron's staff later on. There's a time when he sticks his staff in the ground and it grows leaves out of it. I don't remember if that's the same one. It might very well be the same one that you see here that became a serpent. But if so, that is one of the items that is in the lost ark of the covenant. Do you know what was
Must
put
have
in
been
there?
a short rod.
Yeah. Isn't that the staff
Or else a very long
that,
box.
that had a branch grow on it or something?
Yeah.
Well, there's the rod and there's the 10 Commandment things. The tablets.
The tablets with the 10 Commandments. The rod is in there. And you know what else?
No, they don't let me look in there.
Yeah, a bowl of manna is in there.
The bowl, not the machine.
Good job, Jeremy.
I don't remember what was in there.
The machine.
They let you look in
Is that a trivia
there. They
question?
don't let me.
I don't know.
They've made a machine now
The
that
only
takes
two I
and
remember
turns
was
algae into
tablets
what they
and
think
staff.
was manna. It's an edible
That
substance.
makes it yes.
And they've designed it per the Bible.
Turns algae into manna?
Mm-hmm.
The things you can see on the internet.
No,
Was it the
this
internet?
was on.
He watches all that educational TV.
Okay. Well, these
Why
things are in the
education?
ark somewhere, but we don't know where the ark is.
But there's specific dimensions for the ark too
Yeah.
in the Bible.
Hmm.
Not the floating ark. The Ark of the Covenant.
I know that.
Right.
Hmm.
I think we're all thinking of the same one.
Yes.
An ark
Yes,
means
I
a
will.
vessel. It contains things. The Ark of the Covenant was meant to contain memorabilia.
The Covenant.
God wants you to remember the things that you have been through and that He carried you through. So,
Ark
the
means
staff is a
vessel?
very important part of that whole thing.
Huh?
Ark means vessel?
Yep.
Well,
Container.
It's actually interesting considering ships are still called vessels today.
Yeah.
Yep. So,
They
the
have
first
things
plague,
in the food.
last part of chapter 7, is what?
Chapter 7.
Blood.
The waters become blood. There is a passage in Egyptian historical records that talk about the water becoming red like blood. And they say that anybody who turned to this water to drink it would become like the dead, and they would lose their thirst for real water and thirst for blood. Zombies.
Wasn't it in that that book you had too? The whatever the book is called. The one that
book,
Bernie and
you
you
know.
have, and you were reading. Wasn't that? Didn't it have the river of blood in that too? When
I
we
don't
were
know.
reading it. What's the name of that book? The Alephantari or whatever. The book you brought here and you taught out of it like every week.
The Red Record?
The red
Yes.
record?
Oh.
Yes.
The Walla Walla.
I don't think they had any rivers of blood in that.
I thought it did. On
No.
one of the symbol
Those
things.
those people that came to the New World were split off from these people long before the Exodus happened. So
Oh.
they could not have had any record of it. That book has a record of creation, obviously, and all the way up until the Tower of Babel, they have the flood. But after the Tower of Babel, when the people split off and went over all over the world, that record separates from the biblical
okay.
record, and we have no idea what they were thinking when Moses was going through this. Different stories, different continents. But the Egyptians obviously would have remembered a lot of this stuff. And the Egyptian record of this time period, it's not very complete, and a lot of it has been stricken, right? Because they don't want people to remember their humiliation. So Pharaoh said, strike that out of the record. We're not remembering that part. But they did remember some of the plagues, and there's a mention of the water turning to blood, which is a horrible time for them. You got to depend on the Nile to drink, right? And irrigate your crops. And if it is completely contaminated, that's not cool. Next one, second plague. The
Frogs.
top of
Frogs.
8, frogs. Well, if the water's turning to blood, obviously all them amphibians are going to want to get out of the water, right?
Right.
They came out all over the land. Third plague, in the middle of 8,
Like,
The gnats.
lice. Oh. When you have dead bodies all over the place, you're going to get lice, and then the fourth plague,
What was the
flies.
name of the gnats?
Fifth plague, top of 9.
He's on the beast.
livestock.
They have stuff on the livestock. The Lord makes a difference, chapter 9, verse 4, a difference between Israel and Egypt. So nothing dies of the ones that belong to the Israelites.
I mean a distinction.
Yeah, this says a difference.
Mine says, but the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of
Livestock.
Egypt.
Yep. All the livestock of Egypt died, but not one died of the Israelites. Sixth plague, the middle of
Boils.
9. Ew. Boils. You got insects crawling all over you and biting you and stuff, and now
Starting
they're
to
carrying disease. Some kind of disease gets into you, which makes
Copper
boils
dust
on you.
frogs.
And it's on the man and the beast.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Seventh plague,
Hail.
hail.
Hail, hail, the young
Hail is bad for an agricultural people because it wipes out your crops.
Yep, it says the flax and barley were ruined, for the barley was in the ear and the flax was in bud. But the wheat and the spelt were not ruined, for they ripened late.
Mm-hmm. But look at chapter 9, verse 27. What happens there?
Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said to them these things. This time I have sinned, the Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. Plead with the Lord, for there has been enough of God's thunder and hail. I will let you go, and you shall stay no longer.
So now Pharaoh's sending for them. So he wants them to come and listen. And he promises, if you do this, I will let the people go. Moses said, yeah, right.
He didn't, though.
Nope.
He did not. That's only the 7th plague.
Yep.
Look at verse 35.
And
So
Pharaoh's
the
heart
of
was
Pharaoh
hardened,
was hard. Go ahead.
Yep.
and he did not let the sons of Israel go, just as the Lord had spoken through Moses.
After he saw that it had stopped, he was like, well, maybe that was just a coincidence.
Yeah.
So he decided not to let him go. Moses foresaw that.
Yep.
Moses didn't just fall off the turnip truck yesterday.
No, it was
Chapter
100
10.
something, it was 80 years?
80 years prior. Top of 10. The 8th plague is
Locust.
locust. They got locust plagues right now,
Yep.
going through the Middle East and Africa.
Yeah.
And there was one in Nevada, too, remember? Just several months ago.
Mhm.
In Las Vegas, which may have deserved to have a plague.
Sin City.
Now here's interesting. The 9th plague, let's read that one. Chapter 10, starting in verse 21. See how much time we got. Not much.
Not much.
This will be the last thing we read.
Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, darkness which may even be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was thick darkness in all of the land of Egypt 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. All the way? Then Pharaoh called, huh?
Yeah, a little bit more.
Okay. Then Pharaoh called to Moses and said, go serve the Lord. Only let your flocks and your herds be kept fat. Let your little ones also go with you. But Moses said, you must also give us sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Our livestock also shall go with us, not a hoof shall be left behind. For we must take some of them to serve the Lord our God, and even we do not know with what we must serve the Lord until we arrive there. But the Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. The Pharaoh said to him, get away from me, take heed to yourself, and see my face no more. For in the day you see my face, you shall die. So Moses said, you have spoken well. I will never see your face again.
My battery's about to die, but I'm just going to let it die. So we're about done. But this plague, did anybody die in it?
Nope,
It's just darkness.
just darkness.
So you would think that the plagues would get worse and worse, right? And yet we get up to the 9th plague, and now it's just, I'm just going to make it dark. I'm just going to switch off the lights on them.
No, honey, remember when we went in that cave and they took us into the middle and they turned out all the lights?
Darkness.
It is so
That's
scary.
bad.
That is.
He said it's going to be so dark that you can feel it.
Yeah.
Was it very much?
Yeah, it was one of those.
No, it was
It was
over
like
in
pitch
Mark
black.
Twain's cave.
There was no light at all. And if you were like in a city and you had to find something or somebody, how would you do that? It
You
would
wouldn't.
be bad.
Oh, yeah. I'd rather put up with the frogs and
At least you could see them.
not the dark.
You'd have plenty to eat.
I used to walk to school through the woods, and from my house over to the college, it was a pretty nice walk in the wintertime, because when there's